And so I consider President Trump's remarks to be insulting and frankly appalling.
The Danish Prime Minister's told Trump to stop the threats about Greenland. Do you agree with her?
Well, I'd stand with her. President Trump has expressed his disagreement with our decision not to get involved in the initial strikes. But it is my duty to judge what is in Britain's national interest.
What happens when one of the world's most enduring alliances begins to fracture in full public view? When two leaders who once spoke of strength and shared purpose now speak of disappointment, delay, and diminished trust? For decades, the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom was described as unshakable. It survived wars, financial crises, and political change on both sides of the Atlantic. But in recent weeks, something shifted. And at the center of it is a war in the Middle East that forced London and Washington into their most consequential disagreement in years. When the United States and Israel launched strikes on Iran, the expectation in Washington was that Britain would stand firmly alongside its closest ally. Instead, Prime Minister Keir Starmer refused to allow American forces to use British air bases for the initial wave of attacks. That decision stunned the White House. Starmer made clear that Britain would not join offensive military action. He told Parliament that his government did not believe in regime change delivered from the skies. He emphasized legality, proportionality, and the hard lessons of Iraq. As a former senior lawyer, he framed the issue not as a test of loyalty to Washington, but as a test of Britain's obligation to international law and its own national interest. The memory of the 2003 invasion of Iraq loomed large. That conflict, widely viewed in Britain as a strategic and legal mistake, has shaped political caution for a generation. Starmer invoked that history repeatedly. Any British action, he argued, must have a lawful basis and a viable objective. Without that, the UK would not participate. In Washington, that reasoning did not land well. President Donald Trump publicly expressed disappointment. In interviews, he suggested that such hesitation had likely never happened before between the two countries. He described the relationship as no longer what it once was. The tone was not explosive, but it was unmistakably cold. In the past, Starmer had been described as unusually adept at managing Trump. Despite ideological differences, he had cultivated a working relationship. But the Iran decision exposed the limits of that diplomacy, and then events forced London's hand. Iran retaliated. Missiles and drones were launched across the region. Airports and hotels housing British nationals were hit. A military base in Bahrain was struck, narrowly missing British personnel. And most dramatically, a drone hit RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, causing minimal damage but signaling that British assets were now directly in the line of fire. With an estimated 200,000 British citizens in the region, the calculus changed. Starmer authorized the United States to use British bases, including RAF Fairford and Diego Garcia, but strictly for what he described as defensive strikes. The purpose was limited: to destroy Iranian missile infrastructure at source and prevent further attacks on British interests and allies. He stressed that Britain was not joining offensive operations. The legal basis, his government argued, was collective self-defense under international law. To Trump, even that approval came too late. He described the delay as taking far too much time. He suggested Starmer had not been helpful. He lamented that the relationship was no longer as solid as it once had been. In an extraordinary public broadside, he even speculated that domestic political pressures might have influenced the British Prime Minister's stance. In London, Starmer stood firm. He acknowledged the disagreement, but insisted it was his duty to judge what served Britain's national interest. He defended the decision as lawful, proportionate, and necessary to protect British lives once Iranian retaliation escalated. The clash over Iran was the most visible rupture, but it was not the only one. Months earlier, another issue had begun to sour relations: the future of the Chagos Islands. Under a May 2025 agreement, the UK agreed to transfer sovereignty of the Chagos archipelago to Mauritius, while leasing back Diego Garcia, a critical joint US-UK military base, for at least 99 years. The British government argued that international court decisions had undermined its legal position and that the deal secured the base's long-term operation while complying with international law. Trump saw it differently. He labeled the move an act of great stupidity. He questioned why Britain would give away strategically important territory. He warned that China and Russia would interpret the decision as weakness. At one point, he said he was against the arrangement altogether, despite earlier backing from U.S. officials. London defended the deal as essential to protect the base from legal jeopardy. Officials insisted national security would never be compromised, and noted that allies had publicly welcomed the agreement. But the public criticism from Washington deepened mistrust. Another flashpoint emerged over the question of Palestinian statehood. President Donald Trump openly disagreed with Prime Minister Keir Starmer over Britain's intention to recognize a Palestinian state if progress toward peace in Gaza failed to materialize. Trump argued that immediate priorities should focus on hostage releases and security guarantees, signaling discomfort with unilateral recognition. Starmer, by contrast, framed recognition as part of a broader diplomatic pathway tied to conditions on the ground, while insisting that Hamas could play no future governing role. The disagreement underscored a widening strategic gap, not only over Iran, but over the broader direction of Middle East policy and long-term regional stability. Trade tensions added another layer. Trump threatened tariffs on European countries, including the UK, amid disputes over Greenland and broader transatlantic economic disagreements. While Britain sought improved market access and investment deals during Starmer's visit to Beijing, Trump warned that closer economic ties with China were dangerous. He argued that engaging Beijing posed strategic risks, even as Washington itself imposed tariffs on British goods. Starmer rejected the notion that Britain should ignore the world's second-largest economy. He described the approach as pragmatic, aimed at creating jobs and growth at home. But the episode highlighted diverging strategic visions. Washington pressing for confrontation with China, London attempting a more nuanced economic reset. Even the history of shared sacrifice became a point of contention. Trump suggested that NATO allies had stayed a little off the front lines in Afghanistan. In Britain, that claim triggered outrage. The UK lost 457 service personnel in Afghanistan. Veterans, politicians across parties, and families of the fallen condemned the remarks as inaccurate and disrespectful. Starmer called them insulting and appalling. Trump later praised British troops, describing them as among the bravest. But the damage lingered. For many in Britain, the comments reopened old wounds and raised questions about how Washington viewed Allied contributions. At home, Starmer faced criticism from all sides. Conservatives and Reform UK argued he should have backed the United States more decisively from the outset. They accused him of dithering and damaging Britain's credibility as a reliable ally. Some suggested that failing to support Washington fully had humiliated the UK on the international stage. From the left, the criticism was different. Liberal Democrats and Greens warned against complicity in what they viewed as potentially illegal military action. They demanded parliamentary scrutiny and cautioned against repeating past mistakes in the Middle East. In Northern Ireland, the divisions were equally visible. First Minister Michelle O'Neill refused to attend security briefings on the conflict, describing direct British involvement as wrong and reckless. Deputy First Minister Emma Little Pengilly attended, emphasizing responsibility and the safety of citizens. The disagreement reflected broader tensions within the UK about how closely to align with U.S. military strategy. Meanwhile, British officials scrambled to assist citizens in the region, including those traveling on Irish passports under the Good Friday Agreement framework. Plans for potential evacuations were drawn up as airspace closures threatened commercial flights. Operationally, cooperation between the U.S. and UK militaries continued. Intelligence sharing remained intact. British jets supported defensive operations. But politically and rhetorically, the tone had shifted. Trump openly compared Britain unfavorably to France and Germany. He suggested the once most solid relationship was now something different. The symbolism was stark. For decades, the so-called special relationship was treated as a cornerstone of Western stability. Now its resilience was openly questioned. Part of the strain also stemmed from broader political dynamics. Trump reportedly bristled at Starmer's appointment of Peter Mandelson as ambassador to Washington. Disagreements over Greenland, over Palestinian state recognition, and over trade policy compounded frustrations. Domestically, Starmer faced declining popularity and electoral setbacks, weakening his political leverage abroad. Yet, from London's perspective, the principle at stake was clear. Britain would support collective self-defense and protect its citizens, but it would not automatically endorse offensive military action without a clear legal foundation and strategic objective. That distinction between defensive support and offensive alignment became the fault line. The question now is whether this rupture is temporary or structural. The U.S.-UK alliance has endured previous disagreements, from Suez to Vietnam to Iraq. It has survived changes in leadership and ideology, but rarely has a U.S. president so publicly signaled dissatisfaction with Britain's reliability. And rarely has a British prime minister so explicitly drawn a line against immediate U.S. military requests. The immediate crisis may subside. Diplomatic visits, including a planned royal engagement tied to the 250th anniversary of American independence, could offer opportunities for recalibration. Shared interests in Ukraine, intelligence cooperation, and counterterrorism remain powerful anchors. But trust, once strained, takes time to rebuild. Whether this marks a permanent weakening of the special relationship or merely a turbulent chapter remains uncertain. What is clear is that the bond is no longer taken for granted. An alliance built on shared language, history, and sacrifice now faces a test of strategic alignment. The United States expects loyalty in moments of crisis. The United Kingdom insists on legality and national interest as guiding principles. In a world of rising great power competition, regional wars, and economic fragmentation, the stakes of that divergence are high. The question is no longer whether Washington and London remain allies. They do. The deeper question is whether they still see the world the same way, and whether that shared vision, once assumed, can be restored. Because when the most solid relationship of all begins to feel different, the consequences ripple far beyond two capitals. But Britain was not alone in its unexpected response to the Iran war. Across Europe, reactions to the U.S. strikes were far more divided than Washington had anticipated, exposing deeper fractures within the Western alliance. So how exactly did the rest of Europe respond? Watch the next video to find out.